Apologies from
Ian McCrae, Leslie Cree, Adrian McQuillan, and probably John McAllister.
Okay. Moving on then to draft minutes. Given the short notice of today's meeting, the draft minutes of the 27th of August will be considered at our next committee meeting. Moving on to the main item on the agenda, we received correspondence from Gareth Graham through his solicitor last week. The letter is at page 14 of your packs. Now, within the letter, it states how Mr. Graham intends to set evidence before the committee and how it meets the terms of reference that the committee has previously agreed. Now, we've had a lot of problems and difficulties in terms of getting witnesses before the committee, so it's to be welcomed that someone else has come forward. Just going on what he is saying, it seems to put particular focus on the NI Advisory Committee of NAMA and, quote, lack of accountability between members of that committee and the Department of Finance and personnel, and that has led to his current dispute with Cerberus. So I'm keen to listen to what Mr. Graham has to say. I think it's also important to point out that this witness and all witnesses must stay within the terms of reference and keep themselves right in terms of how they present to the committee. I think that goes without saying. The members have any views in terms of this particular witness being brought forward to the committee?
It's worth saying, Mr. Chairman, that Graham's are taking legal action at the moment on this very issue. We may be back to square one again. I think before we invite them, we have to check with our own legal advisors as to whether, given the fact that this is before, albeit the civil courts rather than the criminal courts, whether we can become involved at this stage.
Well, I think he has usefully, through his solicitor Niall Murphy, pointed out that they are involved in an ongoing legal dispute. So I would propose that rather than rule out all his evidence entirely at this stage, that we write to Mr. Graham outlining the fact that there are obviously concerns around sub judice, the fact that there's a legal dispute, and that he does not say anything during his witness session that would compromise any of that. Now, given the fact that he himself seems to be cautious by sending correspondence through his solicitor, I think he probably will be mindful of that fact as well, given I think he is the party that has taken the legal case. So I don't think he's going to do anything to compromise that. Martin?
I think what Mr. Wells says it may very well be true. We know when the Law Society came they were very constrained, to say the least. On the other hand, I think we should push ahead, and even in the knowledge that we may not be able to hear the full story, but I think we should remind Mr. Graham and anyone else who's coming forward off the criteria of our inquiry. They should stick to that, and then of course he's going to have to be mindful of his own case and any impact it may have on that, his own case with Cerberus. So it may not be as fulsome testimony as we might want, but I think we should do what we did with the Law Society, which is invite them in, and let's hear what he has to say.
There's another comment I made, is that we should check our own situation through our own legal advisors as well, just to make certain that anything we do doesn't prejudice any legal cases.
Now, the issue, I mean, my concern would be that we already have had only 2 witnesses at this stage in terms of DFP, in terms of the Law Society. And in terms of the Law Society, I mean, there is a legal dispute ongoing, but if we delay this for this particular witness, then we need a good reason for doing that. I think we can cover ourselves by simply stating to Mr. Graham that he needs to be mindful. We have sent him guidelines in terms of evidence and how evidence is presented in oral session. We can and we should send him a letter stating that he should be mindful not to be sub judice in the evidence that he gives. You know, short of taking him by the hand through his witness session, I don't think there's anything more that we can do. You know, in terms of the questions we put forward, we already know the remit in terms of our terms of reference, and we already know the need to be cautious around a number of areas. So we have done the preparation. I don't think that we should be overcautious, because to be overcautious will constrain this committee and constrain the inquiry that we are carrying out.
Chair, as committee clerk, I need to point out that the sub-judice rule does apply to the committee as it does to the Assembly and plenary under Standing Order 73, which essentially means that any proceedings, any legal proceedings, either criminal or civil, that are ongoing, should not be discussed in public session because of prejudicing those proceedings. Now, my advice to the committee would be that it would seek legal advice from its legal advisors in terms of the scope for taking evidence within both the committee's terms of reference, and also to ensure that it doesn't fall foul of the sub-judice rule, which is governed by legislation, contempt of court legislation. So,
yeah, but my concern, and it is important that staff within the committee carry out their role in terms of the advice being put forward, and that should continue to be the case. But we are going into these meetings week after week now with legal advice after legal advice after legal advice. I mean, we know what the rules are around ongoing legal disputes. We know the rules around sub-judice. So we know that already. We don't need legal advice to point that out to us any further. So, given the fact that we have that knowledge, we should write to Mr Graham saying that he should stick within the rules, because we could get legal advice and we will still be given the same points to Mr Graham. So I don't see how that would
Mr
change.
Chairman, I think it's something.
Michaela,
Sorry, Jim. Yeah, Chair, I totally respect the legal advice that we get in relation to this investigation and this inquiry from our legal services here. I totally concur with what you're saying. I mean, we have been in recess, and most of the meetings that we have come back out of recess here to have is to get the legal advice, and we've heard more from our legal services than we've had from witnesses. So I think we are well versed in our legal surrounding this inquiry. And I think, if we'll be hearing from our legal services every week if we still go down the route that we're going. And as I say, I totally respect the information that we've been receiving. I think at this stage we're all well versed on it. And as you quite rightly point out, that Mr Graham has gone through his solicitor. So he's obviously well aware of our terms of reference and sub-judice around this case. So, I mean, I would like to see things progressing.
Jim?
Mr Chairman, I think it's more fundamental than taking legal advice as to guidance to be given to Mr Graham. I think that what we'll be asking for, is it even correct at all that Mr Graham appears before this committee? I cannot see how Mr Graham can give evidence which he will not in some way use to help his position in this legal case. And I think we're in a very unusual...
We need to be very careful with what we say in that regard.
Well, yes, but I mean, with privilege, and I'm just saying it's difficult. He may inadvertently drift into that territory. But even more fundamental, we have a very senior official from the Assembly here who is saying that in his professional opinion, his advice to this committee is that we seek legal advice, that we don't take a decision. We just seek advice, and advice quickly. There's no reason why that couldn't be back before the end of this week, and we could have another meeting on Thursday to assess the situation. And I therefore, because I've sat in this Assembly, as I said before you were born, Mr Chairman, I've been sitting in this Assembly, and I can thank, and before Mrs Boyle presumably was born, 1982.
Thank you.
I'm safe enough there?
Around
Yes,
that time,
she's a certain agreeing to that.
Must be the oldest man in the world.
But I've been sitting in this Assembly since 82, and I have never been in a position where the committee has taken advice from a clerk to do certain, in his judgment, giving strong advice to this committee, and for us to ignore that and proceed. And I think in councils, many of us have paid the price for not taking the advice of the Chief Executive when we're told to take legal advice. So I actually will have to, I think I'll have to press this to a vote, which I don't like doing because we normally a committee that goes by consensus. I suspect I know the result, but I think because of the nature of what we're advised, to keep myself right, I want to be seen to be voting against this. Not voting against the principle, but voting in favour of seeking advice from those we pay to guard our interests and protect this committee.
But I think it's important to remember as well, and the legal advisors have said this when they've given legal advice, advice is just advice. And the members of this committee, it's the members that are going to lead, and it's the members that make decisions. And those from within the committee, those from legal services, need to continue to give us advice. Sometimes we will choose to go with it, sometimes we won't. But I think that we have had a summer of taking advice from legal services. We have a summer taking advice and getting little output in terms of our inquiry. And I think that the public and some of the media are looking at our committee and saying, well, there's very little output. So rather than getting bogged down with process and delay, we need to make a decision. And I think that if we have Mr Graham before the committee this Thursday, we do, and I propose that we send a letter to Mr Graham outlining strongly the fact that we have terms of reference that he needs to stay within, and outlining strongly that he should not say anything that will be sub judice. And can I also propose that the committee staff draw up some guidance for myself in terms of those points, to ensure that if Mr Graham does go outside the parameters in terms of the legal case, that I can pull him up on that. But I am not going to go through another week of delay. We need to see some output from this committee, and I propose that we invite Mr Graham to the committee on Thursday. Michaela?
Yeah, Chair, I just want to put on record I am not ignoring the advice of the clerk in this instance. What I'm just saying is that I want to see things progress in the committee, like yourself, Chair. We've been pulled out of recess to return to this committee for this inquiry, and every week it seems to be some sort of a delay, and it's you know, and with respect of the advice that we're getting from our legal services, I think, you know, at every juncture we're going to be at this point, and I want to see things progress. But certainly, you know, just in respect of what Mr Wells has said, I'm certainly not ignoring the advice from it, but I just want to see things progress as well.
Chair, can I just add, I understand the frustrations of members in terms of this review. There's no reason why the committee couldn't work on both fronts in terms of commissioning its legal advice and responding to Mr Graham's solicitor along the lines you propose. The other point is, you've asked for advice to be drawn up for you, for the staff. In order to do that, I would need legal advice. And also I'd point out that the committee's privilege may not apply in circumstances in which it's breaching the sub judice rule. So I would again strongly advise the committee to seek legal advice, and you know, it can do that in conjunction with writing, responding to Mr Graham's solicitor.
Martin?
Oh, I mean, I've some sympathy with Mr Wells, and we should put on record that anyone who appears in front of this committee of inquiry will not be allowed to abuse our good offices by straying outside the terms of reference of the inquiry, number one, or straying beyond the legal limitations in relation to sub judice and other matters. So if it is the case that Mr Graham has to come and can't speak about the court case that is ongoing, then that will be the case. We saw with the Law Society that they were enormously constrained, but I think there was some benefit in it. I'm not going to exaggerate, but I think there was some benefit in it, and I think the message goes to everyone. If the legal advice says that someone can't discuss a case at sub judice, then he can't discuss that part of the case, or he can't discuss that case. But if we were to give in to the fact that because there are a number of court cases going on here, a number of investigations and a number of inquiries, that no one could appear, then we'll never get Service here, who we desperately want to talk to. We'll never get Tunes here, who would desperately like to talk to. We'll never get Mr Coulter here, who would desperately like to talk to. So while I accept what Mr Wells is saying, and I think he speaks in the spirit of trying to protect the committee, at the same time, if we were to allow everyone to say there's court cases going on, we're not going to give evidence, we really couldn't do anything at all. So I'm very mindful of the advice, I'm very mindful of the law, and I can assure you that when we receive this evidence, we will stay within the law and within your advice. You've just given us your advice. I'm not sure why you want to get more advice. I think I take that on board. If you're saying that no one can breach the laws or protocols of sub judice at this committee, then that's it. They will not be breached. But I think we still invite Mr Graham, who has a lot a lot of evidence to present, and we should make sure that the bits of the evidence that we hear do not go beyond the legal advice we've received today.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think that Mr. Graham seems like he would be a very interesting witness to hear from, because he has first-hand experience of dealing with Cerberus and seems to have some information about the appointees to the NAMA Northern Ireland Advisory Committee. But I have listened to what the clerk has said here, and although we've had more than our fill, you might say, of legal advice, this is a different case, and there's ongoing litigation. I'm not familiar with the details of that litigation, and I wouldn't feel that I would know personally when I was straying into the area of sub judice and when I wasn't. And as a result of that, I think the committee would be better to listen to the legal advice and then make a decision about this. Because as I say, we don't know the nature of the actual case that's ongoing. So therefore, it's more difficult for us to delineate our parameters, and we don't want to be in breach of standing order of straying into an area which is sub judice. So I think if we're going to hear from this witness, unfortunately, it's going to have to be contained in such a way that we neither jeopardise the ongoing investigation nor the case which is on the legal action which is being taken as well.
Mr. Chairman, the clerk said something that intrigued me here. Normally we have total privilege within the chamber in session and in these committees, but you alluded to the fact that there may be a situation where we may not have privilege in this committee if we bring Mr. Graham or any other witness. Could you just expand upon that, because I hadn't heard that before?
Chair, I'm not a lawyer, but it is an issue that I would want clarification from the lawyers in terms of if the committee decided to proceed and strayed into the area which is sub judice, the ongoing proceeding between Mr. Graham and Cerberus, then could that affect the privilege which attaches to Assembly and Committee proceedings? It is an issue which would require legal advice for clarity in terms of ensuring that that's.
Can I ask them? I mean, if we were to agree to take legal advice, what would the timescale be in actually receiving it? Because, you know, as Mr. Boyle said, we have been coming here for some time, and progress has been somewhat stultified, and you know, we don't want to prolong the waiting game any further.
Chair, I can ask the lawyers to provide the, you know, I can write to the lawyers today and ask them to instruct them today and ask them to provide the advice ASAP.
Well, I think maybe the compromise here is that on one hand we invite Mr. Graham to come to the committee on Thursday, and we tell legal services to have their advice ready for Thursday morning, and then we take legal advice and then we proceed.
I think that's a very acceptable way forward for me. Personally, I would support you on that.
Well, I'm keen, and I don't know if we will avoid it, but I'm keen not to have a vote on this. I think Mr. Wells, in fairness, that I think he's been, like the rest of us, has been open to those who wish to give evidence, and I think it would be unfortunate if the committee now split at this early stage on calling of witnesses. So if we get the legal advice, you know, some of us are concerned that perhaps legal advice is too slow. There's a lot of other things happening here, I believe, this week. Maybe that will give people more time. I don't know. But if we could expedite the legal advice and only receive Mr. Graham, if we do receive him at all after that, I'd be content with that. I would be reluctant to move to a vote. But
could the meeting be held in two parts on Thursday? that the first part of the meeting, we consider the legal advice, and then we take the decision as to whether we hear Mr Graham. Now, the danger of that, of course, is Mr Graham will be in the building, and we run the risk of saying to Mr Graham, look, our advice is that we don't hear you, and I think he would need to be informed of that. But
The only thing I'm mindful of is that we members are prejudging what Mr Graham will say and making assumptions what he will say. Now, he has responded and outlined in good faith that there is a legal case ongoing, and he has also stated that he will stay within the terms of reference. So I'm mindful that he shouldn't be treated any differently to previous witnesses, such as the Law Society. So I think we should listen to the legal advice first. I think we should still hear from Mr Graham, even if he is constrained. I do expect a man of his character will respect whatever restraints the committee may wish or may wish not to place on Mr Graham following the reception of legal advice.
I think, Chair, with respect, it would be a matter for the committee, and if we do it in two parts, we can deal with that. But perhaps this legal advice, Shane should also say, will we ever hear from Service? Will they be able to say that, and we know that there are always civil cases going on in relation to NAMA, and now some of it's carried on into Service. Perhaps that, obviously, that's very pertinent to Mr Graham, and that's the thrust of the legal advice on Thursday, and I would take that very seriously. What that advice is would certainly affect my decision whether or not we would then invite Mr Graham in. But perhaps it's an opposite time to tell us as well. Will those who don't wish to give evidence, perhaps, will they be able to say that there are court cases on, therefore we're not going to speak to you? So perhaps the legal advice should cover some of that. Or perhaps, Chair, you can bring me up to date where Service are, because when I last heard them mention this committee, they were going to come in and see us in September. Is that still the case, if I'm not
I think they are still scheduled for September. Yeah.
could I just add to that?
That's right, Deputy Chair.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I just wanted to ask you, will it be your view that it would be useful to communicate with Mr Graham's solicitor and draw his attention to the sensitivities that the committee have around the sub judice issue, so that before Mr Graham comes here, that he is instructed by his solicitor not to stray into areas, and his solicitor should be able to give him that instruction, which would be liable to be sub judice.
Totally reasonable, yeah.
Mr Chairman, there's just a couple of issues. I mean, you're presupposing that the legal advice says that we should be seeing Mr Graham at all. And you do run the risk that that advice, which we'll consider presumably first on Thursday, will say, look, this can't be done. And when there's a full turnout, the committee may well vote to take that advice. Secondly, you have to ask, why would Mr Graham want to give evidence to this committee? And it may be he wants to give evidence to this committee to assist in his case. And therefore,
Speculative?
Yes, but I mean, you've got to ask what would be the motivation here. The only two possible motivations are A, to assist the committee in its inquiry, or B, to assist him in his case. So therefore, I think there has to be a very clear distinction between the meetings on first of all, do we accept we take the legal advice first? I think that's obvious. Secondly, do we then, having considered the advice, take the decision as to whether to hear Mr Graham or not? If we're doing that, then Mr Graham needs to be told there's a potential that he may come and not be heard.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair enough. And of course, it could be damaging to Mr Graham's case to the presentation that he makes if it does contravene the laws of sub judice. So it's in his interest to take the advice, and I'm still keen to avoid votes on this. So perhaps
if that's what's agreed, I'm more than happy to accept.
And perhaps on Thursday we'll be able to avoid a vote as well, Chair. I believe that Mr Graham, I've mentioned his case at this committee several times earlier in the year. I believe he does want to assist the committee. I believe the information he has can assist the committee, and it'll be up to us after we receive legal advice or not on Thursday whether we wish to receive. Yeah. That's my view. Do it in two parts.
And of course, at the end of the day, it is the committee's decision. I mean, we've taken legal advice over the summer. Some of it I have agreed with, some of it, frankly, I haven't agreed with. So we'll see what legal services say, and then committee will make the decision as opposed to legal services on the way forward. So members content to move forward on that basis.
So just to recap, Chair, it's to commission legal advice for Thursday on the issue of the scope for taking evidence from Mr Graham. That would include legal advice looking at exactly what is under adjudication in terms of Mr. Graham's case with servers, and then that would determine what areas that would be open to the committee to consider. And secondly, to write to Mr. Graham's solicitor, Niall Murphy, to flag up the issue of subjudice and to ask that they bear that in mind in any evidence provided.
So we're agreed to inviting Mr. Graham,
Yes,
and then the committee will make a decision.
the letter will inform him that he may not be able to address us.
Okay. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, any other business?
No.
Just in terms of the meeting time on Thursday, 10 a.m, okay for members?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, meeting closed.